you would have pressed the button. Milgram proved it. 65% of ordinary educated people did. The mechanism that made them comply, still running. The inner citadel. In 1961, a Yale psychologist ran that experiment. At the inner citadel, we ask what obedience costs. Milgram thought he would study other people's moral failures. He discovered he was studying himself, everyone too. Before we proceed, this is philosophical exploration only. If this resonates as clinical distress, seek professional help. The Yale basement, a plain room, 2 chairs, a table. An actor played the learner, a real person, the teacher. The teacher was told, increase voltage with wrong answers. At 150 volts, screams. At 300, silence. At 450, nothing. The experimenter said 4 words, please continue the experiment. 65% continued all the way to 450 volts. Not from cruelty, from entering the agentic state. Milgram's term, when you stop being a moral agent. Your actions still happen, but feel like someone else's. Haggard at University College London confirmed this in 2014. Under authority commands, the brain registers less agency. This is engineering. The brain reduces conflict when commanded. The anterior cingulate cortex, the conflict detector, goes. What felt wrong before authority spoke stops registering wrong? Now consider 20 years inside institutions built on authority. 20 years of meetings where you knew something was wrong and said nothing, not weakness, obedience crystallization. Blass in 1999, intelligence does not protect from this. Intelligence may worsen compliance, it rationalizes with the gut. This intensifies at 40 to 50. Neuroscience knows why. It connects to what Jung understood about the buried self. Jung spent 40 years mapping what he called the shadow. The shadow is not evil, everything the persona cannot. The persona, Jung's word for the professional self-you. Every time you obeyed against deeper values, something went. Jung called this the compliance shadow, the autonomous self. What we found exploring Jung's collected works, Volume 9. The compliance shadow is not passive, it accumulates pressure. Jung wrote, the unconscious assumes you agree with it. He had watched patients arrive at 50, burning everything. Midlife ruptures, affairs, implosions, crises are the shadows, not failure. Jung calls it eruption, the repressed claiming. Career fully built, and something in you asks, who is? You were told meaning would follow doing everything right. The obedience that built your career is now the cage. When did you last choose something you actually believed in? Kelman and Hamilton identified 3 conditions for the agentic state. First, authorization. A legitimate authority sanctions the action. Second, routinization. The harmful action becomes automatic. Third, dehumanization. The consequences become abstract, invisible. You have experienced all 3 in every institution you've. Recognition is the first act of prohairesis, if this. Jung called it the compliance shadow, buried autonomy. Every time you obeyed against values, part of you. Not disappeared, compressed, waiting for its moment. Researchers found compliance shadow can remain dormant for decades. At 45, something shifts. The biology changes, the shadow, the unexplained anger, the restlessness. That is the shadow speaking. A senior manager, 48, 22 years in the same company. He called it strategic patience. He meant he had stopped. After his resignation, he said, I don't know who I. 22 years of agentic state. 22 years of compliance shadow. This is not character failure. Hannah Arendt understood this. Arendt at Eichmann's trial named it banality of evil. not monsters, bureaucrats trained to follow procedure over conscience. The research here is important and uncomfortable, we say. Milgram's findings have limits. They were Western academic contexts. Replications show variation across cultures the mechanism differs in. We're honest about data limits. That honesty is what? Everything built Milgram, agentic state, compliance shadow, collides now with something 2,000 years older. Epictetus was born a slave, owned nothing, could be. His teacher Musonius Rufus taught slaves and free men equally. From Rufus, Epictetus received the bedrock of inner freedom. Prohairesis, the faculty of deliberate choice. Yours. Not what happens. Not others' decisions. Not career, salary, title. Prohairesis is the quality of your engagement with any situation. Here is what authority in Milgram's study could never touch. They could command your hands, not your interpretation of. This is not philosophical abstraction, it is the crack in. When Milgram's participants stopped, and 35% did stop, they did so by reclaiming their own interpretation. They didn't defy authority, they aligned with a higher. Here's where Milgram and Epictetus converge unexpectedly. Milgram showed the agentic state is triggered by authority cues. Epictetus showed these cues work only when you forget prohairesis. When you remember you have a choice, the agentic. And Jung enters. The compliance shadow has one more dimension. Epictetus owned nothing. He could be sold. His master Epictetus broke his leg, testing what would. Epictetus said, "You are breaking it. That is what will." Not defiance. Precision, naming what happens without becoming it. This is the convergence. Milgram, Epictetan, prohairesis, unknowing. They reclaim deliberate choice at the moment of maximum authority. And Jung's compliance shadow, the autonomous self-career buried. E is the Jungian name for prohairesis repeatedly refused. Every time you entered the agentic state, the shadow grew. 3 frameworks, Milgram, Epictetus, Jung, one truth. The 40-plus professional following harmful orders is using a survival. The intelligent rationalization is evidence of a mind using the tool that built your career does not build your. What we found across frameworks, one diagnostic question. Not why do I obey, but do I remember I? Aurelius governed an empire demanding his compliance with Rome. In the Meditations, private, never for publication, his Book 5 opens, I rise to do the work of. He wrote that while commanding legions, watching his children die. Prohairesis is not peace. It is choosing to remain a. Here is what the 2024 Milgram replication found, unreported. Those who stopped reported not relief, but clarity. Clarity, I know what I choose. That is the inner. The resolution begins not in a boardroom in a. The Stoics called it prosoche, attentive self-observation. Not fighting it immediately, witnessing first. The witnessing activates prohairesis, Jung's contribution, shadow journaling. Witnessing the buried self, Jung suggested, write the thought you silenced in the meeting, not to act on it, to acknowledge it existed. Here's the specific practice you can begin tonight. Step 1. Recall one moment you complied against your own. Not a dramatic event, the small compliance is more revealing. Step 2. Complete this, what I would have said. Do not correct it. Do not analyze, the shadow speaks. Step 3. Not why did I comply, what did? Usually disapproval. Loss of safety. The threat of not being. The compliance shadow was never irrational, it protected something real. The question, does it still need protecting, or is? Milgram's study has one finding that rarely makes popular accounts. When 2 participants were placed together and either refused, Permission to resist is social. Prohairesis is individual, both necessary. Jung offers a deeper understanding of why social permission matters. The compliant shadow formed in isolation, no one naming. Integration begins when another voice says, "I see that too." This is why Milgram's resistant 35% clustered, why Epictetus, Aurelius's Meditations, written in frozen frontier military camps, read as if he needed to remind himself constantly. There is a version of you the career required you. That version is not gone. The compliant shadow kept it. The work of the second half, what Jung called, not building a new self, recovering the self institutions set. This is different from midlife crisis as the culture depicts. Crisis suggests rupture. Individuation is continuity, your own thread. We should name a limitation here. Not everyone is. Economic precarity, structural discrimination, genuine danger constrain even prohairesis. Epictetus understood inner prohairesis is not the same as outer. This practice is for those whose primary cage is internal. If your cage is material, the work is different. The 8-minute practice, 3 evenings this week, will surface something, not an answer, a voice. The shadow, acknowledged, stops erupting. Milgram spent his life asking why he underestimated compliance. The 35% who stopped were more awake to prohairesis. Full breakdown pinned in the comments.